So in 2023, our primary focus of the webinar series was to take content from Nexus, which is OrthoFi's annual business meeting, and then just convert those into 1-hour learning sessions that we then shared with the industry. Tonight, however, is 2024, and we begin a new series with new experts, and we're going to kick it off with our own, as I mentioned, Oliver Gellis. He's going to start us off tonight by setting up the agenda for Nexus. So for those of you who are joining us in February, you'll kind of get a sneak peek. For those of you who are not yet joining us, it's not too late. So we're going to share a QR code where you can join us, and we would love for you to do that. On top of that, he's going to set not only us up for a successful Nexus, but set your practice up for a successful year. Throughout the webinar, you'll be able to submit your questions by using the Q&A. So not the chat, just use the Q&A. Be sure to add those questions throughout the webinar, and then we'll be gathering them up. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll ask those questions to Oliver, and you can get your expert insights directly. So let's get on to the good stuff. Now, Oliver Gellis is OrthoFi's Chief Marketing Officer, and he runs the brands OrthoFi and OrthoBank. He's widely recognized as one of the industry's most strategic brand building experts with over 20 years of experience in the orthodontic industry. One of my favorite factoids about Oliver is that he contributed to Ormco's leadership in self-ligation and their continuing education events and technology innovations for nearly a decade. And, anyone who's followed that brand knows what a great job that Oliver did for that company. He also has a passion for our specialty and always uses data and analytics to help practices in our industry know what to expect from what has happened in the past, and uses that data to really help us all become better at our specialty. He graduated from Georgetown University's Foreign Service Program, and he currently lives in Southern California. Personally, I get to learn from Oliver every day, and I just love working with him. And I know you're going to love learning from him tonight. Welcome, Oliver Gellis.
Thank you so much, Marla. Love working with you too. Love being here tonight. Love the fact that we're kicking off a new year. I love the possibilities and potential of a new year and all the excitement that brings. Tonight, I have the mission to use some data to intrigue you, to interest you, but to also leave you hanging for a little bit more. There's a lot of stuff that I could cover. I don't have enough time to cover it all, but the great thing is if you do manage to get to Nexus, you're going to be able to hear not just from me and hear deeper information on the things that I'm presenting, but as I'm going to show you, we're going to have some of the top speakers in our industry really fleshing out the main themes that we talk about at Nexus. And Nexus is a business meeting. It is not a user meeting like you would expect. It is all about using data to identify themes. And then instead of having a quilt of 20 or 30 different topics, we're going to really dive in on 3 or 4 main themes and topics and flesh them out with lots of expert advice. So with that, I'm going to get us kicked off. So if you know me, you will suffer through this. If you don't, and you did not recognize the name when you signed up and registered for this, and you might have been thinking to yourself, who the heck am I? As Marla mentioned, I've been in the orthodontic industry for 20 years. Collectively with dental industry, I've been in dental and ortho combined over 25 years. I've lectured all over the world. I've written tons of articles. I'm a data guy for those that know me. Yes, I am the Chief Marketing Officer at OrthoFi, but that is not my role tonight. My role tonight is to talk about trends and the industry and really give back to our space. I had the blessing of being able to work with my really good friend, Dr. Jamie Reynolds. We co-wrote and published a book called Level the Curve, which landed last year in April. And we have gotten lots of great feedback. Hopefully, many of you out there have seen it or even read it. It was, for a time, the #1 Amazon bestseller in about 6 categories. So if you haven't picked that up, please pick it up. If you do come to Nexus, you have the opportunity to get your own copy. For as a personal note, again, for those that know me, you know this. If you don't, I also have a complete addiction to movie quotes. I speak in movie quotes, so you may hear some references tonight. But the real reason why you might want to listen to me is that I have access to tons and tons and tons of data from over 500 practices, over 1,300 locations, and over 1 million starts. The point of sale data that we have access to gives us really unique insights into what's going on in the industry. But it's not just my data. I also want to thank our partners at Gauge, our partners at Kane Waters and Associates, and our great friends at Benson Koppel. All three of those are friends that we are constantly bouncing data and trends off of to stay aligned. And it's been a great partnership with all three. All three are playing a role at Nexus and will be there to lend authority to everything we're talking about. So in terms of what we're going to be circling around tonight and why it's so important for us to always use data is the threat of what I want to tune you into, which is what I call confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is something I made up. It's a well-known term in both the scientific and business fields. And basically all it means is that as human beings, when we, receive inputs and facts and evidence, we always filter it through our lens of our own beliefs. And unfortunately, we tend not to take in all of the new information in that filtering process. We tend to ignore the majority of this information and the new facts, and we only accept the information that confirms our beliefs. And so last year's Nexus, the theme was around, we had a fantastic 2021. We had a 2022 that was a correction, a downward correction from that banner year in 2021. And a lot of people came out of 2021 thinking that everything that they were doing was right, that all their concepts were correct. And it was, a massive year for confirmation bias. And we were challenging, last year, as things got tougher, not to build walls and board up the windows, but instead to build windmills. Basically take the winds of change and to channel them with windmills versus just a shelter from the storm. And we've had another tough year, not quite as tough as last year, but again, a lot of practices that we speak to are still very much trapped in some of their old notions because of what we term confirmation bias. So I'm going to be pointing out areas of confirmation bias throughout as we go along. And hopefully when you're sitting out there, look with an open mind and test yourself. If you feel that you are a victim of some confirmation bias, this is a great opportunity for you to challenge yourself. So our agenda tonight, we're going to talk about 4 things. So the first thing we're going to talk about is 2023 starts. And the main question to ask ourselves is it purely economy? I think it's easy for us to write off 2023 by blaming it on the economy or the president, the current administration, or interest rates, or lots of different things. And there are certainly issues with the economy that are driving some factors, but I think we're going to shine a light on some things that are going to show there are areas where we believe that there's been some self-infliction of wounds. So we'll talk about that. Once we set that table, we're going to talk about what can we do if there is, in fact, a continued and lingering consumer confidence issue in the economy. How are we going to react? Are we just going to take it? Or is there something that we can do to countermeasure that? The third thing is really, there are a couple of things that at this stage where we might be at an inflection point, and as an industry and as a specialty, we might need to think about, is it in fact time to shift to digital technologies in the clinic? What does that do for us? Why would we need that? Why is it a good time to lean in? And then lastly, do we need to possibly rethink our org structure in function of some of that, as well as some of the industry trends that we see? So we're going to jump into all those factors. So for 2023, and after, a correction in 2022, I'm sure that a lot of you were probably thinking to yourself, what happened in 2023? Q1, from the trend data, from talking to other industry experts, we seem to come out of the gate pretty good. Q2, flattening out, starting the decline. Q3 saw quite a little bit of correction. And then Q4 still kind of lingered in that doldrum. But what happened was what you see here. So this compares starts trends year over year, starting back from 2019 all the way to 2023, comparing gauge data, looking at OrthoFi practice data, and really understanding what happened. So we all want to forget 2020. I think, we write that off. 2021, all of a sudden, everyone grew 21.5%. In the gauge data, almost 23% in OrthoFi customer data. And all of a sudden, all of our ills went away, and everything we did was right, and we were all wearing the right cologne or perfume, and life was great. So when you blend those 2 years together, it is a very familiar 5.5% growth if you're, non-OrthoFi customer, close to an 8% growth trend if you're an OrthoFi customer, and we're sort of back on track. But then starting in latter half of 2021, everything started to turn. And even though the net of 21 was 21.5%, the back half of 21 was pretty flat or declining. And so by the time 22 rolled around, the correction was in full swing. And as you can see, these percentages, it all started to come back. And so, the question is not, what happened. I think, whether these numbers represent what happened in your practice or whether you were a little bit higher or lower than these, the question is really why. And so we're going to be looking at these trends. We're going to be hearing from some of the industry experts. So both Chris Benson and Ryan Monahan are going to be speaking at length about what's going on and diving a lot deeper into these trends. So if you want to know what's going on in the market, that's one reason by itself to be there. What I want to highlight for you is a specific and acute trend. So this year, as I showed you just a second ago, our total starts per gauge have been down a little over 3.5%. What's interesting is that thankfully the exams are not down by as much. So if you're sitting there doing that math, you see that there's been a little bit of an erosion in case acceptance. The adult braces starts are down close to 4%. Adult exams down about the same amount. So that gels, right? If you look at exam trend, that is really the best indicator of organic market demand. So when you think about what is the economy dealing us as an issue, that's the best metric to look at, is the exam trend. So if your phones are ringing less because people have less money, that's how you're going to see it. What's super interesting is that even though the exams for adults are down 4% and the adult braces starts are down about the same amount, implying the same conversion rate as before, so it's purely demand driven, adult aligner starts are down almost 11% year over year for 2023. Now, I want to challenge everyone out there to think about why that is. What is it about adult aligners that is different from all the other categories in your practice? It did not go down 11% because the appliance is less appealing, because Invisalign was marketing less, or all of a sudden people wanted braces again as an adult. None of that is true. The hard truth is that the reason why adult aligner starts were down is the combination between, yes, the economy was tighter, but adult aligners is the one category in your practice where you artificially create more barriers for the patient to start by requiring high minimum downs. And so Leanne and Tony Paniche are going to do a fabulous job of helping us to understand what it takes to reverse that trend, how to establish your brand, your approach, how to close adults more effectively, both from a financial standpoint and from an influence and value prop standpoint. And they're going to do a fabulous job as they always do. But let's dive into that question about downs. So this is a tried and true thing that has been it's been an industry practice for years, and OrthoFi has always been the gadfly pushing all of these industry, all of this industry dogma and assumptions, and it's all about what works. And so the fact is, again, this is one of those facts that only 4 in 10 American adults can afford an unplanned expense of $1,000. So regardless of what your lab fee is, if you are forcing anyone to pay $1,200 or $1,500 or $1,800 to get started on treatment, you are automatically limiting your ability to get a conversion, and certainly a same-day conversion. Now, in 2021, you didn't have as much of this problem. And I'm showing you the reason why, because the economy was very different then in terms of having stimulus injected into the economy. So a lot of people getting stimulus checks, and because of COVIDs and shutdowns and travel restrictions, nobody had anywhere to spend that money. So what I'm showing you here is the personal savings rate. And what you see is there's a spike of personal savings. So people were flush with cash. So the practice of asking for $1,500 minimum down for aligners was working. And that's why we saw a spike in adult starts during late 2020, early 21. We saw adult spike, and the mix of adult treatment and aligner treatment go into the high 20% range. But now the savings rate is coming back down. So if you haven't changed your approach, you're going to see different results. But again, there's this confirmation bias of, well, it's always worked. Well, this is the new information. So are you going to accept or ignore the information? At the end of the day, like, the economy is about consumer confidence, which is a little disjointed right now versus what the actual facts are. But there are some real things. In addition to inflation, everything that everyone knows, their groceries costing more, gas, depending on which area of the country, the reintroduction of student debt has added an average of 17% to affected family budgets. We're seeing in this chart, for example, credit card balances hitting record highs. So people are spending again and don't have the cash, so they're putting it on their credit cards. And this, phenomenon of buy now, pay later is highly effective, but it is sapping that commitment from that monthly budget. So at double the rate from what it was in 2020, people are buying things using buy now, pay later, and some of these technologies that are out there, are becoming a lot more mainstream. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to challenge you to get uncomfortable, to challenge your beliefs. In this particular regard, the way to address this particular challenge is to adopt what we call open choice. So requiring X minimum downs and thinking transactionally is not a recipe for success, especially in a tight economy. What you want to be thinking about is how to incentivize patients to give you the terms that you want without requiring terms that people can't afford. So this is why we introduced the slider. It's not just good eye candy. It has a lot of intelligence behind it. So for example, we introduced the concept of tiered discounts, not just pay in full. There's only about 20-ish% of the population of your patients that can and are willing to do a pay in full. That really doesn't change with or without OrthoFi. What we are able to get, though, is a lot more patients to give you maybe 50% down for a 2% discount, let's say, or a 75% down for a 3% discount versus just the traditional 5% for pay in full. That gets you a lot more down payment on average. And then similarly, in terms of payments, you don't want every patient picking longer terms. You want the patients that need it. And so Orthofy introduced this concept of low single-digit interest to disincentivize patients to pick higher or to pick longer plans, but to offer them to the patients that need it. And so this is a very famous chart that we've built a lot of our system on. Every dot you see is an actual patient selection over the course of several years. And so most practices live in this typical plan area where all their plans are tightly clustered here. They don't offer the ones in the lower left, but they also don't, because they don't ask for it, they don't accept or offer any ones in the upper right, which are better for cash flow than what they're typically offering today. And when you have all these plans come together by letting patients choose themselves, you get this amazing aggregate balance where it delivers the right amount of healthy cash flow to do this. Now, some of you are thinking, well, this is great, but my Invisalign lab bill is higher than $1,354 a case. But you're still thinking transactionally, because the 20 some odd % of your cases that are Invisalign, yes, are going to cost you $1,500 or some number above that. But your braces cases on average are going to cost you roughly $300 a case. So when you blend in your material costs, most practices have a material cost that's roughly between $650 and $750 when you blend it all together. So being able to get an average of $1,350 per case gives a very healthy cash flow for practices, while the patients have more opportunity to choose yes. Now, again, this is a challenge to what we've always said and what we've always done. Are we ready to accept the facts, or are we going to stay inside the comfort zone of our beliefs? Now, we've been preaching this message for a long time. That chart has been around for years. We continually update it and we keep seeing the same phenomenon. But we are happy at Nexus to be introducing a new program that we have worked and developed in concert with Invisalign. Orthofy is going to be the exclusive provider of the FPT10 program, which is designed to help practices spread their lab fee over 10 months to give them that cash flow relief, so that you as a practice can get out of this transactional mold of requiring that upfront minimum down and stimulate a lot more starts, a lot higher conversion rate, that same day start, and minimize that impact of that adult aligner retraction. If you think about it, if adult demand is down 4%, but that segment is down 11, that means you're giving up 7 additional points because of how you're charging for those cases. So with this program, we believe that we can not only preach that practices think the right way about this, but we're giving you a way to do this that is financially sound. So look out for that. Really excited for that program and what it's going to help our practices to do. And Orthofy, again, is going to be the exclusive provider of that practice, which is a great reason to get interested and look at it. So we've locked in on a lot of data. We've locked in on what's happening. So the question is, what do we want to do about this? So if in fact consumer demand is going to be down, and none of us can control the economy, none of us can control inflation, none of us can control consumer confidence, but we can be strategic about what we want to do about it. So the 4 keys that I want to touch on tonight, and we're going to dive a lot deeper into this at the meeting, but there are 4 keys to increase your production in a down volume, down demand market. The first one is obviously increasing fees. There's been some inflation on a lot of different products. That also gives you license and cause to think about looking at your fees. There's also adding levels of service. You can create value and higher upsell fees by adding levels of service. We're going to talk about how to increase your average fees, possibly by selectively paring down your in-network participation. Or if you're in a practice that's not comfortable with getting out of network, you want to stay in network. And certainly carriers are becoming a lot more predatory about finding new pressure ways to keep you in network. If you want to stay in network with all the same carriers you have, there are strategies that are proven to maximize your in-network fees and minimize your in-network negotiated discount. So we're going to talk about that, all those things together. And you don't have to do one, you can do a combination of several, add meaningful amounts to your net average fees, which helps to insulate you from a decreased demand. So let's talk about fees. So a lot of practices starting in 2021 were coming to us and they were asking, what we thought that they should be able to do in terms of their fees. And, with our practices, we were able to work with them, and most of our practices are seeing a little over 6% higher fees than what they had since 2021. We probably will update this for Nexus, including 2023. This gets us to late 2022. But what I wanted to show you is that there is some elasticity here, meaning practices can charge higher fees and not negatively impact their conversion rate. So what we did to analyze this is we looked at all the practices that increased their fees, and that was about 76% of our practice load, versus the other cohort, which had fees that were either flat to prior year or decreased. And what we saw is in both groups, the conversion rate actually increased in 22 versus 21. But because the cohort group that increased their fees had higher production, the production was significantly higher than the group that that was flat or decreased their fees, even though their conversion rate was a little bit better. So there's this trade-off between conversion rate and your average production per case. But Orthofy has always, done a great job of understanding these concepts and helping our practices to navigate it so that you can have a net win. And so this is a great case study, and I'm not going to go into it in supreme detail, but we are often working with our clients to help them to achieve their goals. And so in this particular case, this case study is working with a large DSO, and they were very much leading with price. That was their initial strategy prior to coming on with Orthofy. And we thought that they could do a lot better, not by lowering their fees and continuing that price competition, but by lifting their fees and by leaning into our concept of open choice, using flexibility to help patients afford and select higher fee treatments. And so what we were able to see is over a 2-year period, the average fees went up by 23%. Think about that, 23% higher fees, and the conversion rate went up by 20%. So that seems counterintuitive, but because of the open choice, because of the flexible options, and the fact that patients were able to choose, it actually made it more appealing. So at the same time as fees were going up, the conversion rate was also going up, which causes a real windfall type of impact. So this get uncomfortable moment is to challenge you to explore your elasticity, to look at your fee schedule and not just raise everything across the board, but look at each fee and think about where is there a pocket of elasticity. So I have tons of friends in the industry, and I've had tons of calls early in the year. Dr. Kyle Fagala called me on Jan 1 as I was getting ready to watch one of the bowl games, and he was already like knee deep and looking at his fees. And so I have nothing but respect for Dr. Fagala, and it was a great conversation. And thankfully, I was able to give him some guidance there. But I challenge you all to think about this. So So in terms of in-network participation, obviously carriers are promoting and marketing their in-network as a way to getting more patients. And we wanted to test this theory. And so I'm going to share with you some information here. There is one hole in this information, but I can tell you we have very high confidence that that hole is not a factor. But what we wanted to look at was, what is the difference in fees between practices that are in network and practices that are mostly, if not all, out of network? And then how does that impact their conversion rate? Do patients convert at a higher rate when they're in an in-network practice? Do they show up more to their exams when they're in network? And largely the answer was no. There's really no meaningful impact in conversion rate and kept new patient exam rate. What was different, as you would expect, is the practices that were out of network had much higher fees, roughly $500 higher fees. And as you would expect, the practices that were out of network had a little bit less patient benefit, but at the end of the day, they were still converting the same percentage of patients. So in terms of impact, this is a pretty impactful thing. Imagine that your fees for your insurance cases were $500. Try to do that math, and you'll see that there's quite a bit of impact there. And our own Paula McGinty is going to do a fabulous presentation at Nexus, going through all this, how to think about which carriers to keep in, which carriers possibly to think about going out of network with, and how to evaluate that in your practice. There's also a fabulous case study where in this particular case, the doctor's goal was to reduce the number of working days, but he was galvanized around making sure that he did not reduce his revenue and production. And so what we did was we didn't change any other variable except for taking that practice out of network. And by doing that, it effectively increased their fees roughly $1,000 on average across all the cases. So even though the doctor worked fewer days, worked one less day, reduced the number of starts by 14% over that 2-year period, the production actually increased by 5.5% versus the initial year. So you can see in the orange line the number of starts per year, and then you can see the blue bar in terms of production. And then the in-network discounts, you can see the chasmic drop in network discounts and how that worked out. So another fabulous case study to show how you can counter a drop in starts. In this case, it was the doctor choosing to do less starts, but you can also apply this in terms of an economy impact. The last case study, we're going to be showing a lot more at Nexus, but the last way to materially impact your revenue and your production is by maximizing your in-network fees. As we know, it's harder and harder to negotiate, good, treatment fees, with the carriers. They're often asking for pretty deep discounts, but a lot of practices don't realize how much they can offset that by good strategies of unbundling codes, by adding certain codes, certain premium appliance codes, certain diagnostic codes, certain additional treatment codes that allow them to top their fees back up. So we've been working with a couple of very large DSOs that wanted to take this on. And what we've seen is on their in-network cases, they've seen a $500 to $600 higher fee on those cases, which when blended across all their cases contributes to about $350 overall fee increase. If you're thinking about that compared to a $5,000 fee, that's roughly a 7% increase in overall production, which doesn't add extra costs. So all of that extra 350 goes straight to the bottom line. So I'm going to push you to be uncomfortable, to get smart on insurance. And, at Orthofy, we believe we're the experts. So we'd love to talk to you. But if you don't want to, talk to Orthofy, we definitely, encourage you to reach out to Tina Byrne. She has forgotten more about insurance than many of us will ever know. But I challenge you to get smart on insurance. So the last way to think about increasing fees we mentioned is there's two factors here, right? One is thinking about adding levels of service. So for example, I am huge on promoting limited treatment. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a slide or two. Everyone has limited treatment in their practice, but most practices don't promote it. It is like, underneath the carpet, and it comes out only in certain special instances. I would challenge you that, especially for adults, there are lots of adults that are not ever going to spend $5,000 to $6,000, or at least they're not going to start out that way. And there is a tremendous unmet market for that treatment modality. Now, there are ways to do it in a way that doesn't cannibalize your current full treatment adult fees. And we're going to talk a lot about them. But again, I'm challenging everyone to really incorporate limited treatment as a true growth strategy versus a fallback to failed conversion. But there's also a lot of things that are becoming a lot more mainstream. And, it's important to have these tools and incorporate them. Lifetime retention, using accelerated treatment technologies, dental monitoring. And then again, as a challenge, like having an elevated platinum level of service that could even include things like hard and soft tissue contouring, using laser contouring for gingival tissue, making whitening complementary for the highest level of service, and having a menu that people can elect to take you up on a higher level of service if that's what they want and need. All of those things add revenue per case without you having to necessarily increase your fee for the same service. And then the other way to get higher fees is to decrease your promotional discounts. Unfortunately, as Ryan Monahan is going to show us, the amount of discounts actually went up in 2023. That showed that practices were a little bit more insecure about getting their full fees, and so they were offering more courtesies. So, how do you decrease the discounts? By shifting more to digital treatment, which lowers your actual chair time and your actual clinical treatment costs, using, remote monitoring, all of these things that make you more clinically efficient to where your cost of case management goes down. But the other one that I'm really big on is reallocating your discount dollars and turning them into team incentives. There's a lot of data to show and back up that if you took right now, if you went in and looked at all of your discount dollars, the amount that you gave away in discounts last year, and you cut that number in half, which means you're going to give half the amount of discounts, but you took that half and invested it into team incentives, that every dollar that you invest in team incentives yields $3 of additional production. It doesn't seem right, but the reason why that works is that most patients, in order to incentivize them to go from a no to a yes, if discount and price is the only tool you're going to use to incentivize them, the amount that it takes to shift a patient from a no to a yes is somewhere between $150 and $200. However, the amount that it takes to get your team incentivized to go from good to great, to work together better, to change and optimize all of your standard operating procedures, do better handoffs, do all the things that it takes to get same-day starts, is a fraction of that, is anywhere from a quarter to a third of that. And they actually drive growth a lot more effectively than discounts. So again, this is another challenge moment, and we've got tons of amazing education on all these different things. Andrea Cook talking about how to incorporate some of these technologies, Dr. Feldman, Dr. Jackson talking about lifetime treatment. Zane Harris is going to do a hard look at the actual profitability of limited treatment and how to think about that very differently. He's going to blow up a lot of dogma and how we've thought about it. And then Tracy and Brooke and Michelle are going to paint us a picture of what the new modern practice in 2024 and beyond can look like. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. So I wanted to circle back on this because this is one of the most topical things that has happened in the last few months. And again, this is a classic risk and flag for confirmation bias. So a lot of us were doing a rain dance when Smile Direct Club announced that they were going bankrupt. But I want to caution everyone to take the wrong conclusion from that. So I tell you here, Smile Direct Club did not fail because that offering was not popular. They did not fail because of lack of consumer demand. They failed because they didn't manage their finances well. They overspent, were a little too optimistic about uptake curve on their advertising spend, and they did the Krispy Kreme of over expanding on brick and mortar locations way too quickly, way too early. But I want to go back and remind you, this offering of a limited treatment for lower treatment cost is in demand. So how can you fill this gap? Because it's not going to go away. If you don't fill this gap, there's going to be another company that comes in that's going to manage their advertising spend better, that's going to manage their expenses and build maybe more the right way, and is going to fill this gap effectively. And we're going to have given this opportunity right back to them. So this is an opportunity looking you straight in the eyes, and I challenge you to take advantage of it. So with that, the last couple questions I think we should be asking ourselves is it in fact time to shift more wholesale into digital? Chris Benson is the expert in this. He's going to be talking a lot about this at the meeting. He definitely is a big believer in this. There are a number of factors that should make us think. Again, they're new facts, new evidence that should make us think differently about this situation. Many of us have our core beliefs where they may have tried some accelerated digital technology in the past and it wasn't ready yet. But what we see today is a little different. So today, largely, a lot of the technologies out there are better than they ever have been. They're more consistent. They are now lower cost to where they're actually pretty viable from an average case cost. And if in fact the clinical efficiency claims are even close to what they say, it is potentially a very good way to address some of the trends in the market. For example, we see very high clinical staff turnover ever since COVID, people not coming back, talent drain in organizations. Hiring for many of you has been a lot more challenging. Salaries have climbed over 22 to 23% in the last couple of years. So, managing your growth by staffing is harder than it's ever been. So can we use digital technologies to open up clinical capacity where we can treat a larger number of patients with the same amount of staff and scale differently? The other cool perfect storm factor is that because of the climb and mainstream usage of digital, treatment setups with aligners, we now have, team members that are now trained and effective and experienced at managing the digital setup workflows. So we just need to lean a little harder into that same skill set. And we're going to have a great panel with, doctors and experts. Dr. Jared Gianquinto, good buddy of mine, Adam Schulhoff from Grin, Dr. Alyssa Emery Carter, who's into just about every new technology. She's going to be talking about her experience with monitoring. And then Brian Wright has lots of great data talking about his experience with practices and Invisalign. And so it's going to be a great panel talking about, when is the right time? Is it now? And some good perspectives on that. The last question I want everyone to ask themselves is it time for us to rethink our orgs, our organizational structure? So again, with the issue that we're seeing with staffing, with consolidation, with possibly a shift to different technology sets, with different chair side considerations. Is it time for us to rethink the way that the orthodontic practice is set up and organized? Achieving scale, like I said earlier, is more challenging and difficult than it's ever been. So is staffing the way to grow, or is partnership and technology, in fact, the way to grow? In addition to the staffing issue, you also have the fact that insurance carriers and insurance management is more complex than it's ever been. And unfortunately, it's not going to get easier and it's not going to get better because carriers know that complexity actually helps them. It allows them to pay slower. It allows them to pay less. So they're going to keep heaping conditions and complexity, and it's going to increasingly challenge your team. And when you're turning staff over at a higher rate and you have more expertise loss, that those two factors are combining for something that makes for a big challenge. The other thing about growing with team, as you guys all know, is that team dynamics are hyper important, and it makes it harder and harder. The larger the team you have, the larger the risk that you're going to have some team dynamics, misalignment, morale issues. And so we've got some of the best speakers in the industry covering a lot of these different topics. So Sue Hanen and Tina Byrne are going to talk to us about insurance and management. Jill Allen is going to talk about how to deal with your staff and turnover and partnership, along with Tracy Martin. And of course, Dino is an expert at morale and team dynamics and how to really get your team connected to your mission and connected to your business. So we are super excited to have them speak to us about those things. So in terms of takeaways, I'm challenging you again. I want you to think about how you can adopt open choice so that you can tackle that adult start drag that we're seeing and minimize that drag. I challenge you to explore price elasticity. I want you to get smart about insurance, really understand how to maximize everything that you can get out of that. Think about adding levels of service, leaning into digital workflows. It's not just a toy anymore. It could be your main tool in the box. And then lastly, rethinking your org. You may come away after rethinking it and reset it just the way it was. But in times like this is the time to rethink your org and get ready for a climb. Because if you're going to do all these things when times get better, the people who have been doing all this during the lean times are going to be already ready, and they're going to win when everything loosens up, when interest rates start falling and the economy loosens back up. The people who have been doing all of this self-reflection are going to be the winners. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I left my email here in case anyone has some specific or questions. Hopefully you guys put some questions in the Q&A. But again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Oliver. That's always some great information. Love hearing how you pull data together and really make it meaningful. So that was very good. We do have a couple questions. So got a few questions around FP10. So you kind of tease that out a little bit. So talk to us a little bit more about FP10, and is that only for OrthoFi clients?
Yes. So FPT10 is available only to OrthoFi users. It is a program that we partnered up with Invisalign to offer. So if you're an Invisalign customer, what that means is whatever your current payment terms are currently, for all future cases after getting on with OrthoFi and getting on the program, what it'll allow you to do is when you hit your ClinCheck 30 days after your ClinCheck is approved, instead of it being your typical net 30 or net 60 terms that you're paying today, what it means is that 30 days after, your lab fee is going to be split into 10 equal payments that are going to be paid via ACH over the next 10 months. So if you think about the single use case of initial case, that let's say a $1,500 lab fee, you're going to be paying $150 30 days later, and then $150 each month for the next, for 10 months. So that's just the one case. So if you were doing the math, if you had net 60 terms, you'd be paying $1,500 60 days later. With this program, you will only have paid $300 to Align in that same period of time. So again, going back to why do I currently require patients to pay me $1,500? It's because 60 days later, I owe $1,500. But by doing this program, Orthofy is putting our money where our mouth is and is helping enable practices to think differently and act differently and helping them with the impact to their practice.
Right. And I know that there will be more information about that at Nexus as well. And I believe we'll have some Align representatives there as well. So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned the limited treatment options. And so a practice is asking, should we be publicizing the limited treatment on their website? Like, how should we be kind of framing up limited treatment?
It's a great question. I think there are a lot of different philosophies on limited treatment. I know, for example, Tracy Martin has a very unique and aggressive posture about limited treatment. She's actually advocating for practices to put the full menu on their website. And that might end up working. I'm a little bit more conservative than that. I don't know that I would lead with a low fee for limited treatment. What I would do is when I was talking to an adult, especially if I had the Orthofy cheat sheet in front of me and they said that they want to put low down and low monthly, where I can already see that they have some financial issues, what I would do is I would set up 2 treatment plans. The top tab would be my full treatment fee. As a doctor, I'm going to clinically recommend this is what you need. This is the best care that we can give you. And it's going to be whatever your treatment fee is. And we have invested in this great Orthofy technology to make it as appealing and as affordable as it can possibly be. But if the patient squirms or if the patient is clearly uncomfortable with those options, you can just tab over and be showing them now, if you're not ready for all that, and then you go into a conversation about limited treatment. But rather than doing it and waiting for a no, and then taking the slider back and then going into the other room, and then you're creating a very disjointed experience where you're leaning into a no. So what I would do is I would be set up and ready. And instead of it being if it fails 2 weeks later, I might come back to them with something else. I'm offering them a set of options and I'm leading with the best one for them, which is full treatment, but I'm ready in case they're not ready. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I know there's going to be lots of talk about that at Nexus as well. I believe it's Brooke Oliphant that's going to be talking about how to shift the conversation from a full treatment conversation to limited if that needs to happen. So going to be some great information there. So sorry to shift back to the FP10 program again, but here's another question for that. If we're an Orthofy user, is there an additional fee to us from Orthofy to use the Invisalign payment plan?
Nope, there's no fee for FPT10. All it is you let your Ortho Success Manager know that you're interested in this program. We let Align know. The only stipulations to be part of this program is that you're in good financial standing with Align. So meaning that you don't have any past due bills with Align. And they give us the approval, and then the practice enrolls via their Invisalign portal for the program.
Okay, great. Now here's the question. I know that you mentioned how the Orthofy slider allows practices to charge interest, and there's a question from the audience. I was under the impression that we could not charge interest on in-house financing. Is that something offices can do, or is that something specific to Orthofy or third-party companies?
Okay, so here's my answer. Orthofy does allow you to turn interest off, but I am going to tell you, you should not do that. If your concern is that it's going to be less appealing to patients, there is reams and reams of data that show that patients are not converting at a lower rate because of interest. It's actually almost the opposite. I actually have data showing that the practices that are actively using interest see a higher conversion rate. That is not because patients prefer interest to no interest. The reason why the practices that actively use interest do better is because they are the ones that are letting the patient fully decide. Because as soon as you turn off interest, now there's no disincentive for the patient to go to the lowest and longest plan that they can possibly choose. And so TCs immediately know that that's going to be the case. And so what do? They bring the slider back and they're now controlling the choice again. As soon as the TC is now controlling the choice and the patient doesn't feel the comfort of being able to choose whatever is comfortable for them, it actually decreases conversion rate. So you can do it, but I heavily advise you not to do that.
Okay, and so your advice is not to turn interest off in the OrthoFi tool, but what about a practice if they maybe they are not using OrthoFi? Can a solo practice charge interest? Is there a legal reason that a practice would not be allowed to charge interest?
You can charge interest. All that you need to be able to do is to have a contract that has the federally mandated truth in lending language, which our contracts in OrthoFi practices do. You can look it up. It's not, we don't have a monopoly on it. You can look it up or have your counsel, find that language and you can put it in there. I will tell you, 85% or higher percentage of the practices are actually doing this wrong today, because the actual legal opinion, which is if you go to the AAO website, you will actually find this. If you offer a painful discount, the federal consideration for that is it's actually not a discount. When you offer a painful discount, what is really happening, according to the federal government, is your full fee actually is interest. That's actually a financing charge. So technically, everyone should already be using truth in lending language. Most practices are not, and clearly there's not a lot of enforcement, but you should technically be using it today because that is already regarded legally as a financing charge. But you can definitely charge interest. Every state has different regulations, so you should check with your state to understand if there is a maximum level of interest. We do not use or recommend high amounts of interest. The interest is not there for you to rake in extra money. The interest is there for two reasons. It is to act as a disincentive for patients to choose longer extended plans. And it's also to offset the incremental risk of those longer plans on your default risk. So we're actually able to maintain, and control a very low default rate using the interest.
Okay, and so that truth in lending statement is the key there. And OrthoFi, of course, helps to implement that and pull all that together. So those are our questions for tonight. Great webinar and great audience participation and questions. I do want to point out the card that's on the screen. Oliver has been giving some great information and a few little previews of Nexus tonight. And we would love to have you join us, and there's still time, and we're even still going to give you a discount if you join this late. So please join us in Denver. We would love to have you there and hear more from Oliver, as well as all the speakers that he's mentioned tonight. So just use this QR code if you'd like to join us. And then the next slide here is if you're interested in an OrthoFi demo. If you're not an OrthoFi client, we would love to complete a demo, and we have some specials here if you go ahead and schedule that right away. So, just use this QR code if you'd like to join us. Oliver, thank you again, and great information. And I'm sure that Oliver would love to answer any questions individually that you have. So he did include his email address on there, and just a wealth of knowledge with the data at his disposal. So, reach out to Oliver if you have any specific questions. Thank you again, all of you, for joining us. Thank you, Oliver, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Marla.